The morning sun peeked through the blinds of the Riverside Police Department as Officer Lily Taylor pinned her badge to her crisp uniform. 3 months on the job, and she still felt that flutter of pride each time she looked at herself in the mirror. The badge gleamed in the light, reminding her of the day her dad had first shown her his military medals when she was just 8 years old. Lily had always known she wanted to follow in her father's footsteps, though in her own way. While James Taylor had disappeared for months at a time on business trips that nobody talked about, serving in Special Forces operations that remained classified even now, Lily chose to protect and serve right here at home. The local newspaper had once called her dad the Ghost after he'd silently led a hostage rescue in some far-off country. She smiled at the memory while adjusting her utility belt. "Hey, rookie, those parking tickets aren't going to write themselves," Officer Reynolds called out, his booming voice echoing through the locker room. The older cops always found something to tease her about. "Come in, sir," she replied, double-checking her appearance one last time. The station buzzed with its usual morning chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and the constant chatter of officers discussing cases. Lily made her way to her tiny desk, sandwiched between the water cooler and the copy machine. Not exactly prime real estate, but as the newest officer, she took what she could get. "Taylor, you alphabetized the case files again, didn't you?" asked Officer Patel, holding up a perfectly organized folder with color-coded tabs. Lily felt her cheeks warm. "They're easier to find that way," she said with a small shrug. "Only you would spend extra hours organizing paperwork nobody reads," Patel laughed, but there was kindness behind his eyes. "You're too by the book, kid." "My dad always said attention to detail saves lives," Lily replied, powering up her computer. "Ah yes, the famous father we've never met," chimed in Officer Wilson, leaning against her desk and sipping his coffee. "The way you talk about him, you'd think he's some kind of superhero." The other officers within earshot chuckled. They'd heard Lily mention her father enough times to create a running joke about the mythical superdad who could probably take down criminals with his pinky finger. "He's just a regular guy," Lily said, though she knew that wasn't exactly true. There was nothing regular about James Taylor. Later that morning, during their patrol briefing, Captain Brooks assigned Lily to work with Officer Henderson, a veteran with 15 years on the force who made no secret of his annoyance at having to babysit the rookie. "Taylor, try not to recite the entire police handbook today," Henderson grumbled as they headed toward their patrol car. "Sometimes you gotta trust your gut, not just the rules." "The handbook exists for a reason, sir," Lily responded, checking her gear methodically before getting into the passenger seat. Henderson rolled his eyes. "Your old man a lawyer or something? Nobody follows every rule to the letter like you do." Lily bit her lip, deciding against explaining that when your father spent decades moving like a shadow through enemy territory, where one mistake meant death, following protocols became second nature. The other officers didn't understand. They couldn't. They pictured her father as some strict, boring government worker, or maybe a retired beat cop. None of them had any idea that the man who taught her to ride a bike could also disassemble and reassemble a rifle blindfolded or speak 6 languages fluently. As their patrol car pulled away from the station, Lily's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down and felt her heart skip a beat. "Everything okay?" Henderson asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "Fine," she replied, slipping the phone back into her pocket. "Just fine." The message from her father was simple: "In town tomorrow. Thought I'd stop by to see where you work." The next morning, Lily walked into the break room to find half the day shift huddled around the coffee machine. Their conversation stopped abruptly when she entered, replaced by poorly hidden smirks and knowing glances. "Morning," she said cautiously, reaching for a mug from the cabinet. Officer Patel slid over, making room for her at the counter. "So, Taylor, I hear you've got a visitor coming today." Henderson mentioned it at roll call. Officer Wilson chimed in, leaning against the refrigerator. "Said you got all nervous when you got a text yesterday." Lily poured her coffee slowly, buying time. She hadn't told anyone exactly who was visiting. "My dad's just passing through town. No big deal." Captain Brooks walked in, heading straight for the coffee. The room fell silent as he filled his mug, but the moment he left, the chatter resumed with renewed energy. "Your dad, huh?" Officer Chen said, wiggling his eyebrows. The famous mystery man himself? Is he really as strict as you make him sound? Asked Officer Rivera, the youngest officer besides Lily. Because my dad's pretty tough, but the way you follow rules makes me think your old man must be some kind of drill sergeant. Lily stirred sugar into her coffee, watching the tiny whirlpool form in her mug. He just believes in doing things the right way, she said with a shrug. Anyway, he's probably only stopping by for a few minutes. Officer Henderson walked in, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. Taylor's daddy's coming to check up on his little girl, he announced to the room, biting into the apple with a loud crunch. Probably wants to make sure we're treating his princess right. The room erupted in laughter, and Lily felt her cheeks burning. She was used to being teased. It came with being the rookie, but something about them joking about her father made her uncomfortable. He's just a regular guy, she said again, but her voice was drowned out by Officer Wilson's booming suggestion. Hey, we should mess with him a little, Wilson said, slapping the table. You know, show him we're tough cops who take care of business. What kind of messing with? Lily asked, suddenly alert. Henderson grinned. Nothing bad. Just a little intimidation, some tough talk. Maybe flash the badges and guns a bit. Give him the old "we're watching you" routine. That's a terrible idea, Lily said, but the others were already warming to the concept. I bet I could make him squirm, Officer Chen boasted. I've perfected my interrogation face. Makes perps confess all the time. You couldn't intimidate a kindergartner, Officer Rivera shut back. Now me, I've got the height advantage. One good looming stance and civilian dads usually back right off. Before Lily could protest further, Officer Wilson raised his hand for silence. I propose a department-wide bet, he announced with mock formality. Whoever can make Taylor's dad the most uncomfortable wins. Wins what? Someone called out. Wilson looked directly at Lily with a mischievous grin. A month of free coffee runs from our rookie here. The room filled with cheers and laughter as officers began comparing intimidation tactics. Lily tried to interject, but Henderson cut her off. Don't be a spoilsport, Taylor. It's all in good fun, he said, patting her shoulder. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Your dad gets a little nervous around a bunch of cops. That's practically a rite of passage. Lily sipped her coffee, a small smile playing at her lips despite her concerns. If only they knew. Her father had stared down warlords and terrorists. He'd survived gunfights and explosions in places that didn't even appear on maps. The thought of these officers trying to intimidate James Taylor was almost funny enough to let the bet play out. Fine, she finally said, raising her voice above the chatter. But don't say I didn't warn you. Warn us about what? Officer Chen asked, looking genuinely curious. Is your dad some kind of tough guy? Lily just shook her head, heading for the door. I guess you'll find out. The morning crawled by with unusual slowness. Every time the front door opened, Lily found herself glancing up from her paperwork, wondering if it would be him. By lunchtime, the anticipation in the station was almost palpable. Officers who normally ate at their desks or grabbed food from the deli down the street lingered in the building, finding excuses to stay close to the reception area. You sure he's coming today? Officer Rivera asked, adjusting his tie for the third time that hour. He said he would, Lily replied, trying to focus on the report in front of her. Her father had never been one for exact times, a strange contrast to his otherwise precise nature. He appeared when he appeared, often without warning. The clock ticked past 2, then 3. Lily began to wonder if perhaps he'd been delayed or changed his mind. It wouldn't be the first time an unexpected mission had pulled him away from family plans. At 3:42 p.m., Lily noticed the time on the digital wall clock. The front desk officer buzzed her desk phone. Taylor, you've got a visitor, she said, her voice sounding oddly formal. Lily's stomach did a little flip. I'll be right there. As she stood to leave, she noticed Officer Wilson nudging Henderson. Both of them immediately stopped what they were doing and followed several paces behind her, trying unsuccessfully to look casual. By the time she reached the hallway leading to the reception area, it seemed half the department had found reasons to be in her vicinity. You guys aren't subtle, she muttered over her shoulder, but they just grinned in response. The first thing Lily noticed was the unusual quiet. The typically bustling reception area, with its constant flow of people coming to file reports or ask questions, had fallen strangely silent. Officer Kim, who manned the front desk and normally had a joke for everyone, sat perfectly straight in her chair, her usual smile replaced by an expression of alert attention. And then she saw him. Her father stood just inside the entrance, wearing ordinary clothes, dark jeans, a simple gray button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a leather jacket that had seen better days. He wasn't particularly tall or physically imposing. In fact, to an untrained eye, James Taylor might have looked like any other middle-aged man running errands on a weekday afternoon. But Lily knew better, and apparently so did everyone else. It was the way he stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced perfectly, hands relaxed at his sides but ready to move in an instant. It was the way his eyes swept the room once, registering every person, every door, every potential exit. It was the almost imperceptible nod he gave to the security camera in the corner before his gaze settled on his daughter. "Dad," Lily said, stepping forward with a smile. "You made it." James Taylor's weathered face softened slightly. "Promised I would." His voice was quiet but clear, with a firmness that seemed to carry across the room without effort. Lily reached to hug him and felt the familiar stiffness before he returned the embrace with one arm. His other hand remained free. A habit from years of always being ready. Behind her, she heard Officer Wilson clear his throat dramatically. She turned to find him standing with his chest puffed out, badge prominently displayed. "Mr. Taylor," Wilson said, extending his hand with exaggerated confidence. "Officer Wilson, I work with your daughter." James shook the offered hand with a grip that made Wilson blink twice. "Sir," he acknowledged simply. Lily watched as her father's gaze moved past Wilson to the cluster of officers poorly pretending to have business in the reception area. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made several of them suddenly remember urgent tasks elsewhere. Officer Henderson approached next, walking with the swagger that usually worked well when interviewing nervous witnesses. "So you're Taylor's old man," he said, looking James up and down. "Heard a lot about you." "Have you?" James replied, his tone giving nothing away. He turned to Lily. "Your workplace is interesting." The awkward silence that followed was broken by heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. Sergeant Thompson, a barrel-chested man with salt and pepper hair who ran the department with military precision, strode into the reception area with a stack of files tucked under one arm. "Taylor, I need you to sign off on these incident reports before." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes landing on James. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Lily watched her father's expression shift almost imperceptibly, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a barely noticeable tilt of the head. Sergeant Thompson's reaction was far more obvious. His spine straightened as if pulled by invisible strings, and the hand not holding files twitched at his side in what looked suspiciously like a suppressed salute. "Master Sergeant Taylor," Thompson said, his voice carrying a weight Lily had never heard before. Her father nodded once. "Sergeant Thompson, Marines 2nd Battalion, if I remember correctly." "Yes, sir. 2003 to 2011. Thompson looked slightly dazed. "I didn't realize, when Lily said her father was military, I assumed." "You assumed regular army," James finished for him. "That's usually best." The exchange wasn't lost on the officers hovering nearby. Henderson's cocky stance had all but evaporated, replaced by visible confusion. Officer Wilson was looking back and forth between Thompson and James like he was watching a tennis match. "Would you like a tour of our facility, sir?" Thompson asked, suddenly all professional courtesy. "If my daughter has time," James replied, looking to Lily. Before she could answer, Captain Brooks appeared, drawn by the unusual quiet that had fallen over his usually bustling station. "What's going on out here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on James. "And you are?" "My father," Lily said quickly. "Dad, this is Captain Brooks, my commanding officer." Brooks extended his hand with the easy confidence of a man used to being in charge. "Welcome to our station, Mr. Taylor. Your daughter is shaping up to be an excellent officer." James shook the offered hand firmly. "Glad to hear it. She's always been determined." As they exchanged pleasantries, Lily noticed Officer Puttle leaning close to Thompson, whispering something. Thompson's reply, though quiet, carried just enough for her to catch. Not just any soldier. Special operations. The kind you don't ask about. Like wildfire, the whispered information spread through the gathered officers. Faces that had been prepared for their intimidation game now showed varying degrees of realization and in some cases alarm. "I'd be happy to show you around, Dad," Lily said, trying to act normal despite the strange atmosphere. "It's not very exciting compared to what you're used to." As she led her father away from reception, she could feel the eyes of every officer following them. The tour itself was brief. The building wasn't large, and there wasn't much to see beyond the bullpen, break room, and a few interview rooms. Throughout it all, James asked thoughtful questions about protocols and equipment, showing genuine interest in her work. They paused by the bulletin board where commendations and notices were posted. James studied a photograph of the department's tactical team, taken after a successful drug bust. "Your SWAT team trains on Thursdays?" he asked, noticing the schedule pinned beside the photo. "How did you?" Lily began, then shook her head with a small smile. "Never mind." As they continued walking, Lily became aware of how officers were reacting to her father's presence. Those who had been the loudest about the intimidation bet now found reasons to be busy at their desks. Others, particularly those with military backgrounds, watched with a respect that bordered on reverence. Officer Rivera approached them cautiously as they passed the water cooler. "Mr. Taylor," he said, with none of his usual cockiness, "would you mind if I asked what branch you served in?" James looked at the young officer for a long moment before answering. "Army," he said simply, but that was a while back. The way he said it, casual yet final, made it clear that further questions would not be welcomed. Rivera nodded and stepped back, looking both disappointed and relieved. Captain Brooks insisted on showing James the briefing room himself, steering him away from Lily with a hand that hovered near but never quite touched James's shoulder. Lily followed a few steps behind, watching the interaction with growing amusement. "We just upgraded our equipment last year," Brooks was saying, gesturing to the digital smartboard that dominated one wall. "Makes coordination much easier during large operations." James nodded, his eyes taking in details that others might miss. "Could set up. Secure connection?" "Of course," Brooks said quickly. "Everything runs through an encrypted server." As they moved through the room, Officer Chen approached Lily, keeping his voice low. "Your dad's not just regular military, is he?" Before she could answer, Thompson joined them, clapping Chen on the shoulder. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby officers to hear. "About 10 years ago, I was stationed at a forward base in a place I'm not supposed to name. Our unit got pinned down bad, real bad. Command told us no extraction was possible." Thompson's eyes drifted to where James stood examining a tactical map on the wall. Then in the middle of the night, 4 men appeared out of nowhere. No uniforms, no insignia, nothing. They got us out through territory we thought was impossible to cross. "What does that have to do with Taylor's dad?" Chen asked, confused. Thompson smiled grimly. "One of those men had a particular way of moving, economical, precise. Never said much, but when he spoke, everyone listened. I never saw his face clearly. We called them the Ghost Team because they were never officially there." He nodded toward James. "Until today, I thought I'd never see any of them again." Chen's eyes widened. "You're saying her dad was?" "I'm not saying anything," Thompson cut him off, "because nothing happened. Officially." The story spread quickly, spoken in hushed tones around the edges of the room. Lily caught fragments as she followed her father and the captain, mentions of classified missions, impossible rescues, and units that didn't exist on any official roster. With each retelling, the stories grew slightly, taking on the quality of legend. Meanwhile, James continued his tour, asking practical questions about response times and patrol coverage that impressed the captain. When they reached the small gym used for physical training, they found several officers gathered around Officer Wilson, who had been boasting earlier about intimidating Lily's father. "Mr. Taylor," Brooks said, "this is where our officers maintain their physical readiness. We have a monthly qualification course that everyone must pass." James surveyed the modest equipment with a neutral expression. "Functional," he commented. His gaze fell on a worn punching bag hanging in the corner. "You train hand-to-hand." "Basic defensive tactics," Brooks replied. Officer Wilson here actually leads some of those sessions. Wilson straightened up, some of his earlier bravado returning. That's right. I hold a black belt in karate. He stepped forward with a confident smile. Maybe you'd like a quick demonstration, sir. Nothing serious, just to show Lily's old man what we teach here. The room fell silent. Lily felt her stomach tighten. Her father hated showing off and usually avoided any kind of public display. She stepped forward to intervene, but before she could speak, James gave a slight nod. Just the basics, he said quietly. Wilson's smile widened as he moved to the center of the training mats. Don't worry, I'll go easy. Wouldn't want to embarrass you in front of your daughter. A few officers winced at Wilson's words. Thompson shook his head slightly, backing away to give them space. James removed his jacket, handing it to Lily, and stepped onto the mat in his button-up shirt. Maybe just show me how you'd handle a standard wrist grab, James suggested, his voice mild. For educational purposes. Wilson nodded eagerly, clearly thinking this was his chance to impress. Sure thing. I'll be the attacker first, then you can try. He reached out to grab James's wrist, moving with the exaggerated slowness of a demonstration. What happened next occurred so quickly that many officers missed it. One moment Wilson was reaching forward, the next he was blinking up at the ceiling, his arm extended in a perfect control hold that had him completely immobilized, with James standing calmly beside him, barely looking like he'd move at all. Like that? James asked quietly. For 3 long seconds, nobody in the room moved or spoke. Wilson blinked rapidly, his expression shifting from shock to embarrassment as he realized what had happened. With minimal effort, James helped him back to his feet. Sorry, James said quietly. Old habits. Wilson rubbed his wrist, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. That wasn't karate. No, James agreed, but offered no further explanation. Captain Brooks cleared his throat. Well, that was certainly educational. He glanced at his watch. I just remembered we have the department's shooting qualification this afternoon. Mr. Taylor, would you care to observe? Purely out of professional courtesy, of course. Lily recognized this for what it was, the captain's subtle attempt to learn more about her father's abilities. She opened her mouth to politely decline on his behalf, but James nodded. I'd be interested to see how you run your qualifications, he said. 20 minutes later, they stood at the department's indoor range. The space wasn't large, just 6 lanes with basic paper targets. Officer Patel, who served as the department's firearms instructor, was explaining their qualification course to James. Standard issue Glocks, Patel said, gesturing to the weapon on the counter. We qualify quarterly with 50 rounds at various distances. Most officers score between 40 and 45 hits in the center mass area. James nodded, examining the setup without touching anything. Lily noticed how several officers, including those who had been part of the intimidation bet, had suddenly found reasons to be at the range. Taylor holds the department record. Henderson called out from where he leaned against the wall. 48 out of 50. Nobody's beaten it in 2 years. All eyes turned to Lily, who shrugged modestly. Lucky day, I guess. 48 is very good, James said, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, the closest thing to pride he ever showed publicly. Captain Brooks, who had been watching the interaction carefully, stepped forward. Mr. Taylor, I don't suppose you'd care to try the course, just for comparison's sake. Many of our officers' parents have never handled a firearm. The invitation hung in the air. Lily knew her father hated showing off, but she also recognized the subtle challenge in the captain's voice. James hesitated, looking at her. It's okay, Dad, she said. They're curious. After a moment, James gave a small nod. If it's allowed. Patel quickly set up a lane while explaining the safety protocols. James listened attentively, though Lily knew he could probably recite firearm safety rules in his sleep. When handed the weapon, he checked it with practiced movements that were so smooth they almost looked casual to the untrained eye. Standard qualification, Patel explained. 10 rounds at 5 yards, 15 at 7 yards, 20 at 10 yards, 5 at 15 yards. You can start whenever you're ready. James nodded, stepping up to the firing line. He took a moment to adjust his stance, then raised the weapon. What followed left the room in stunned silence. Instead of the deliberate, careful shooting most officers employed during qualification, James fired with a rhythm and precision that seemed almost mechanical. He moved through the distances with minimal pauses, his expression never changing, his breathing steady. When the last casing hit the floor, he carefully placed the weapon down and stepped back. Patel activated the target retrieval system, bringing the paper target forward for inspection. As it came into view, Officer Chen let out a low whistle. There were exactly 50 holes, all within the center mass area, most clustered so tightly together they formed what looked like a single ragged hole in the middle. I've never seen. Patel stammered, looking from the target to James and back again. 50 out of 50, Captain Brooks said quietly. Perfect score. Muscle memory, James said with a small shrug. When you do something enough times, it becomes automatic. The implications of that simple statement weren't lost on anyone in the room. Lily watched as the last traces of the intimidation bet faded from her colleague's eyes, replaced by something that ranged from respect to outright awe. Henderson leaned close to Wilson. Still think we should try to scare him, he whispered. Wilson shook his head slowly. I'm starting to think we're the ones who should be scared. By the time the workday ended, word of James Taylor's visit had spread throughout the entire department. Officers who hadn't been present for the demonstrations found themselves cornered by their colleagues, eager to share what they'd witnessed. The story grew with each telling. By evening shift, some claimed he'd disarmed 3 officers simultaneously and shot a perfect outline of a human figure on the target. Lily finished her shift paperwork while her father waited patiently in a chair beside her desk. The station had a different feel now. Officers who'd barely nodded to her that morning now stopped by to say goodbye, their tone noticeably more respectful. Even Henderson, who'd been her biggest critic, lingered awkwardly before leaving. Taylor, he said finally, good work on that burglary case yesterday. The report was thorough. Coming from Henderson, it was practically a standing ovation. Lily nodded, hiding her smile. Thanks. See you tomorrow. As they walked to the parking lot, the evening sun casting long shadows across the asphalt, Lily could feel the questions building inside her. They'd always had a complicated relationship. Her father wasn't one for deep conversations, and she'd learned early on that certain topics were off-limits. Still, something had shifted today. You didn't have to do all that, you know, she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. The demonstrations. James looked at her sideways, a hint of amusement in his eyes. I heard about the bet. Lily felt her cheeks warm. You weren't supposed to know about that. They weren't very subtle. They reached her car, an old blue sedan she'd bought with her first paycheck. James ran a hand along the roof, checking for dents or scratches with the automatic vigilance that characterized everything he did. Are they always like that with you? He asked, his voice casual but with an underlying tension she recognized. They're just testing me, Lily replied, leaning against the driver's door. It's what they do with all rookies. James nodded slowly. And now? Now, she laughed softly. Now I think they're terrified of what my dad might do if they don't treat me right. Good. The simple word carried unexpected weight. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the last of the day shift officers exited the building. Captain Brooks nodded respectfully to James from across the lot before climbing into his SUV. Your shooting was impressive today, James said suddenly. 48 out of 50. Coming from anyone else, it might have seemed like a small compliment. Coming from her father, it was everything. Lily felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the evening sun. I had a good teacher, she replied. James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black case. He held it for a moment, as if weighing a decision, then handed it to her. This was my first field knife, he said quietly. Carried it through 3 continents. Lily opened the case with careful fingers. Inside lay a tactical knife, its black blade showing signs of extensive use and care. The handle was worn smooth in places where fingers had gripped it countless times. Dad, I can't. It's yours now, he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. You've earned it. She closed her hand around the case, understanding the significance of the gesture. Her father wasn't one for sentimental gifts or emotional displays. This was his way of saying he was proud. Thank you, she said simply. James checked his watch. Dinner? There's a place near my hotel that looks decent. I'd like that. As they walked toward her father's rental car, Lily noticed Thompson leaving the building. He caught her eye and gave her a respectful nod, not the kind given to a rookie, but the kind shared between equals. You know, she said as they drove away from the station, no one's going to believe me when I tell them I'm your daughter anymore. James raised an eyebrow. Why's that? Because now they think you're some kind of legend. She laughed softly. The Ghost Squad, Dad? Really? The corner of her father's mouth twitched in the closest thing to a smile she'd seen all day. No comment. That's what I thought. Lily settled back in her seat, feeling a new confidence wash over her. Tomorrow would be different. The rookie with the rulebook was gone. In her place was Officer Taylor, daughter of a legend, and beginning to create her own.